We will never give in to extortion, because that's what it was. They tried to extort. The Democrats tried to extort our country.
Leader Schumer and the overwhelming majority of Senate Democrats waged a valiant fight week after week after week.
The CEA guesstimates that it's about $15 billion a week. It lost about 60,000 American jobs. I think we're looking at GDP at the fourth quarter about 1.5% lower than it would have been if we didn't have the shutdown.
The political postmortem well underway as the government shutdown ends and government tries to get back to normal. Let's bring in our panel, Fox News media analyst Howard Kurtz, Fox News contributor Byron York, and Olivia Beavers of the Wall Street Journal. So Jeffrey says that Schumer and the other Democrats waged a valiant fight. But to hear the progressives in the Democratic Party tell it, it's more like a catastrophic nullity.
Oh, I mean, it certainly was very interesting. I remember running up to Elizabeth Warren and asking, do you think it's time for new Democratic leadership? And she no-commented me, which I feel like, you know, usually you get some sort of defense. But for most parts, they're not calling for his head yet, but there was some sort of, you know, massaging of it was a very difficult moment. You know, I feel like he did the right thing, but we didn't get what we wanted and we're disappointed. So we'll see, because I think Democrats are pretty frustrated that for 2 times, I feel like they haven't walked away from government funding fights with wins. Leader Schumer had met with his Democratic senators to try to prevent that from happening this time, but now they're walking away pretty empty-handed.
Yeah, and a lot of people are saying that he had to at least have had tacit knowledge and maybe gave a little bit of a nod to the 8 who did vote in favor of the CR in the Senate. In terms of the change of leadership, here's what Democrats in both the House and Senate are saying about it.
This problem is bigger than one person, and it actually is bigger than the minority leader in the Senate.
We've got to have a hard conversation as a caucus about what we all need to do, what kind of leadership we need in order to make sure that we don't continue to break apart. That means we need more effective leadership.
All right, so Olivia's point, they're sort of nodding at it, but listen to what Cory Booker said. The Democratic Party needs to change. It is time for a new generation of leaders to stand up to Trump. And if the Democratic Party is to deliver, new leaders must rise, stand, and fight. That could be a problem, Howie, for people like Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, but, you know, the president won the shutdown, and the Democratic dinosaurs who said, you know, we should have just kept this going for another month to get the same non-result while putting the country through more and more pain, they are just off base. I mean, what else were they supposed to do? But at the same time, there was collateral damage, John, for President Trump in the sense that he seemed so determined to keep frozen the SNAP food stamp program that he even threatened the states that wanted to use their own money to do it. So he wasn't putting any points on the board when it comes to empathy. And as far as Obamacare, boy, Mike Johnson sounds like he's in no rush to do anything on that, talking about reforms and so forth. But President's savvy, and he knows that if people are paying double premiums or pushed out of the program, that he's going to take the political hit.
You got to wonder if the Republicans were playing rope-a-dope with this promise of an Obamacare vote, because if you look back at history, whether it was the American Rescue Plan or the Inflation Reduction Act, not a single Republican voted for those tax credits. Why would they now?
Well, this was being said at the time when Senator Thune says, I guarantee you'll get a vote. I'm not going to say you're going to win, but you'll get a vote. You know, I think Republicans are certainly enjoying all of this turmoil on the Democratic side, but I think there's a sense of frustration in the sense they would like there to be a price to be paid for shutting down the government for 43 days. And that's why, you know, you just heard Kevin Hassett talking about it reducing GDP, of having huge effects. They're hoping, I think, that it would move the needle with voters a little bit, not all the way to next year's midterms, but at least in the short term.
Well, certainly President Trump has got an idea of what can move the needle politically, and it's this idea of affordability. He says it's an issue that Democrats leveraged very well in last Tuesday's elections. Listen to what he said here.
Their line is prices, affordability. That's the new word, affordability. It's much less expensive under Trump, and we have the greatest economy in history.
Are Republicans not selling it enough?
Yes, the Republicans don't talk about it.
Yeah, so the president is afraid that Republicans aren't talking enough about what really matters to voters, which is why he's coming out with these ideas. Well, he's toying with the idea of 50-year mortgages, possible portable mortgages, tariff rebate checks, giving federal health care dollars directly to Americans as opposed to the government giving it to the health care companies. Is that the right message Olivia, for Republicans to carry into next year's midterms?
I mean, I think Republicans need to be paying attention to the economy. It's the number one issue usually on voters' minds. And it comes after President Trump seemed to sort of dismiss concerns in that interview about how voters were feeling. And you don't want to have, we've seen in terms of history, previous presidents who have dismissed how voters feel about how their pockets are. And there's been huge blowback. So I think that there's some sort of reconsideration, and they're trying to rectify that moving forward, because I imagine that's going to be a huge factor coming into the midterms.
Do Republicans, Howie, need to get back to basics? It's the economy, stupid?
Well, they're taking a lesson, as you often do in politics, from the Democrats' success in those off-year elections and talking about affordability. At the same time, this is the challenge for the president, because although he likes to say that, things have never been better, I mean, in fact, he has not been able to slow down the kitchen table issues that the Democrats use so effectively. And I think he and the Republicans need to figure out how to connect with voters on that crucial issue.
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of Republicans, including Speaker Johnson, are looking at last Tuesday and saying Democrats win in blue states, big deal. But there's a kind of a head in the sand mentality to that they're ignoring some of the things that we saw in that election that may spell trouble next year for Republicans.
To emphasize what Olivia said, there was a terrible moment for Trump in that interview with Laura Ingraham, where Laura says, well, what about the millions of Americans who say they are feeling anxiety about the economy, about their own finances? And Trump said, I don't think they're really saying that. The polls are fake news on this. This is the greatest economy we've ever had. He seemed completely out of touch with all those people who are feeling anxious, who are, falling behind on their car payment, who can't buy a house, whose credit card balances are rising. There's a lot of people in that situation, and Trump appeared to just completely dismiss the whole thing.
Yeah, remember Biden got tagged with that, sort of whistling past the graveyard as inflation was in double digits.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.